Welcome back. In the previous video, we already did the graphical analysis to demonstrate the relationship between the price elasticity of demand and total revenue. Okay, and we said that businesses in practice can use these to figure out the ways they price their products. Okay. Um, In this video, we're going to talk about three interesting applications. Okay, and here, these three applications can all be found in your textbook. Okay, so the first one, titled as the "Can good news for farming be bad news for farmers?" So it talks about, in the past century, because of the technological innovation in farming, it actually improved the productivity of farmers. Okay, so that's a good news for farming. However, that somehow lowered the total revenue for farmers, okay, or their income. Um, so again, you can find more details in the textbook about this. One thing I would like to point out is I really like the discussion Greg Mankiw put it over there about the major sectoral change in the U.S. economy in the past century. Okay, because when you know check out the discussion at the beginning of this application, you would find that it's a microeconomic analysis, okay, about farming, about the farmer's income. But towards the end, we're kind of apply this to the US economy and find that, this can actually explain what happened to the US economy in the 20th century. Okay. At the beginning of the century, we found that the US economy was actually pretty much agricultural oriented society, right? But later, because of this, what we just talked about, then you find that the U.S. economy switched from the agricultural oriented to manufacturer or industrial economy. Okay, so please go and check this out in your textbook. The second one, the second application is about OPEC. Okay, why did OPEC fail to keep the price of oil high? Okay, so for this one, I'm gonna discuss this in the video. Okay, so in the next slide or few slides, we're gonna look at this one. Okay, the third application says that does the drug interdiction increase or decrease the drug-related crime? Okay. All right. So as I already mentioned, we're gonna discuss number two in depth here on this video. But for number one and number three, I'm gonna leave that for as the reading assignments for you guys. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's look at the OPEC. Okay, why did OPEC fail to keep the price of oil high? First of all, we're gonna understand what OPEC is. Okay, OPEC stands for the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Okay, so it's a group of countries that produce a lot of oil and export them. Okay, now in terms of the production, the OPEC production accounts for about 40% of the world's oil production. Okay, so you can see that it accounts for a significant um, share of the market global wide. Its exports account for about 60% of the world oil trade. Okay. Now, starting from 1970s, OPEC actively manipulate its production in order to affect the global oil price. Okay, and the ultimate goal is to maximize their oil revenue. Okay, for example, the OPEC, the very first time started doing this was back in 1973, and between 1973 and 1974, they cut their oil production substantially, which eventually led to a rise, a 50% rise in the global oil price. Okay, and later in 1979, they tried it again, and at that time, the oil price approximately doubled, okay, between 1979 and 1981. All right. The interesting observation we could make is after that, OPEC actually found that, in the relatively long run, in other words, if we look at like, over the course of several years or even several decades, OPEC was not that successful in terms of keeping the oil price high. In other words, when they announced the production cut in the first few weeks or even month, we found that the oil price increases. Okay, but after that, it drops back to the kind of the pre-announcement level. So this price manipulation or price control is not that effective. Okay, so here we're gonna look at why. Okay, but before that, before we start doing the graphical theoretical analysis, I would also like to share with you that two um, economic headlines we found this year. So here OPEC Plus announces the surprise oil output cuts. Okay, back in April this year, and actually this month, September 2023, the oil price spike as Saudi Arabia and Russia extend 1.3 million barrel a day oil cut through December. Okay, so again, that agreement for these oil exporting countries to cut their production was supposed to expire, okay, this month, and then they decided to, at least Saudi and Russia decided to extend that till the end of this year. Okay, in other words, even today, even it was not that successful, but the OPEC is still trying, okay, and trying to change their oil production in order to boost the price and their income. Okay. All right, here let's do the graphical analysis. But before we discuss this on the screen, I would actually encourage you to pause the video and see if you can do this by yourself. Okay, again, it's very simple supply and demand analysis. And think about, for example, in the short run, in other words, the days or weeks or month after they announced the production cut, then what's going to happen on the market? Okay, and also think about in the long run, what could be different? Okay, again, pause the video and try this by yourself before you check out the rest of this video. All right, let's come back and do this. So in the short run, we believe that both supply and demand curves are going to be relatively inelastic. Now, why it's inelastic? On the demand side, because people take oil or oil-related products like gasoline as necessities, right? So you could imagine, as we said before, at the beginning of this chapter, demand for necessities tend to be inelastic. So that's why here you see we put a relatively steeper demand curve on the graph. Okay. Now, when you look at the S1, which is the initial supply curve, you will also find it's relatively inelastic. Okay. Why? Because the different from many other, productions. Oil production depends upon, number one, your oil reserves. Okay, in other words, something that the mother nature determines. Okay, so it's not like, for example, some countries, Mexico, Brazil, or Argentina, when they see the higher oil price, all of a sudden they all decided to produce oil. If you don't have the oil reserve, then you cannot do that, right? And another production limit is the capability of extracting oil. Okay, again, because the oil producing industry is actually pretty heavy in terms of the equipment, technologies. So again, you cannot change your oil production in the short run. So for both of these reasons, we believe the supply of the crude oil in the short run is also going to be inelastic. Okay. Now, as we already said that, when they cut their oil production, then we're going to shift the supply curve towards the left because there's a decrease in supply, right? So on the graph, you find that, with the inelastic supply and demand, when we shifted the supply to the left from S1 to S2, you find a huge increase in oil price and a small drop in quantity demanded. Okay, so in this case, you could find, based upon our discussions in the previous video, you would find that the total revenue for these OPEC countries are going to rise in the short run. Okay, because the additional revenue generated by a higher price outweighs the lost revenue because of the higher price, right? So overall, they're gonna see an increase in their revenue. Okay. However, in the long run, the situation might be different. Okay. Now, in the long run, on the demand side, we're gonna see it could be more elastic. Okay. That's why we put a relatively flatter demand curve on the graph here on your right-hand side. Now, why demand becomes more elastic? Because with a higher price, for example, some people may say, oh, I'm not going to drive by myself. I'm going to take public transportation, right? Or they would say, I'm going to go biking, okay? If when I go to work, I'm just going to bike instead of, drive. Or I'm going to buy Tesla. I'm going to buy electric cars, right? So we have, many other ways that people can respond to a higher oil price in the long run. Okay, so that's why we believe demand becomes more elastic, and you find the supply is going to be the same thing. So again, in the long run, with a higher price, oil price, then some other countries also has the oil reserves. They're going to produce more, right? They're not going to follow. They're not going to be controlled by OPEC. They're not going to follow the agreement made by the OPEC countries. So they can produce more and make more money, right? So that's why in the long run, the supply curve also become more elastic. Now here, if we shift the supply to the left by the same degree, okay, from S1 to S2, here you would find that the price increase is going to be much smaller and the quantity demanded drops becomes more significant. So overall here, you would find that the extra revenue generated by a higher price are going to be smaller than the lost revenue because of the higher price. So in the long run, we would find that the OPEC oil revenue is going to drop if they cut the production and raise the price. Okay. All right. So that's the reward application we discussed. Okay. And so upon this moment, we already finished our discussion of the pricing strategy. Okay. And in the next video, we're going to talk about the other two elasticities, which are income elasticity and cross price elasticity of demand.